Alright, so in today's video, I'll be discussing lot sizing. Alright, in the previous video, we learned how to create a gross requirement schedule followed by a net requirement schedule. So let me just catch up with the previous video, just as a recap. Alright, so in the case of a gross requirement schedule, we basically essentially figured out what are the components that we need and what is the latest time by which we need to place the order. In this case, let's just take one component on hand. Let's pick component D for instance in this particular case, because we need to place the order twice here. So we need to we actually have a requirement of 600 units of D in week 2 and 200 units of D in week 4. Okay, now to do this, in this particular case, since we have the lead time as only 1 week, we know that we need to place the order of 600 units by week 1 and 200 units by week 3, and this is the latest date by which we need to place these orders. You guys can understand that as the deadline. You cannot go later than that, but that might not be the cheapest option, right? Sometimes it might make more sense to maybe order all 800 when required in one lot, all right? Or you might want to order it in different lots, and essentially we want to figure out which of these options will make it most economically cheapest, or the minimum economic cost. So in this case, we have 600 units required in week 2 and 400 in week 4. So we want to figure out what is the best lot sizes to minimize our costs. Now in this case, so we're just looking at component D here. So when we're doing lot sizing, we're trying to figure out the lot sizes for each of the components. Now we can see that here component A, or the final product A, we have 50 units of A required in week 7. However, if A was required all over in week 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, then obviously we would have required D in almost every single week. And if that's the case, then in that particular case, it becomes a very important decision how much to order per lot, and that's the type of problem we're trying to address when we're approaching lot sizing. All right, so generally there are 4 standard lot sizing templates. The first one is lot for lot, where we're going to order exactly what is the required quantity. So in other words, this is very similar to a just-in-time approach. So if we need 30 units in a particular week, that's what we're going to order. So we're only going to be ordering enough for one period. All right. The economic order quantity is going to basically assume is going to help us calculate the economic order quantity, just as we did in the inventory chapters, and then we're going to use that number as our lot size. However, this might not yield the minimum cost, because the EOQ assumes that the demand is constant, and the demand may not be constant for the case of this question. And then we have part period balancing, which basically we try to figure out what is the optimum number of periods where we can bunch up the requirements into one order, and that generally yields a lower cost. And then we have periodic order quantity, which is very similar to the part period balancing. So since the part period balancing always yields a lower cost compared to the periodic order quantity, but this is a bit simpler, so I'm only going to be covering part period balancing in this video. Okay, so let's start off with an example. So let's say a company has determined that the gross requirement for one of its components, and let's call it component D, is as follows for the next 10 periods. So we have the gross requirement for component D as here. So it's on week 1 we have 35 units, week 2 we have 30 units, week 3 40, none on week 4, 10 on week 5, 40 on week 6, and so forth and so on, right, all the way. This is the gross requirement for component D. The setup cost for component D is $100 per order, and the holding cost per week is $1 per unit. The lead time of the component is 1 week, and there are currently 35 units on hand. So we're going to assume that is the beginning inventory that we have, right? And there are 100 units. $100 is our ordering cost. Every time we place an order, it's going to cost us $100, and every time we have to store 1 unit for 1 week, it's going to cost us $1. And the lead time is obviously 1 week as well. So now let's try to determine the optimum lot sizes for the next 10 periods. Like how can we place the orders for these 10 periods to minimize the total cost? So whenever we have this, obviously we have to consider the holding cost and the setup cost, and whatever minimizes that is generally going to be the preferred method. So let's start off with the first method, which is lot for lot. So on the first row, I'm going to put in the weeks. Right? We have 1 through 10. I'm going to start with 0 here, just so that I can account for the beginning inventory. I'm going to place the gross requirements as per the question, which is given in the question here, right? And then the next part, I'm going to place the projected amount of inventory that I have on hand given each period. All right, so that's my projected on hand. So I'm starting off with 35 units on hand beginning, right? So I'm just going to place that there so that I don't forget that. So the beginning inventory for week 1 is actually 35, right? That's what I have. The next thing is I want to figure out the net requirement, which is generally the difference between the projected, so the gross requirement and whatever I have on hand. So in this case, the gross requirement for week 1 is 35 units and I have 35 units on hand. So the net requirement for that particular week is going to be 0. Then I have my planned receipts, which is how much I expect to receive during that week or that period. So since I don't have a net requirement, I'm not going to be receiving any inventory or any shipments during that particular week. And I have my planned order, which basically means when I need to place the order. Generally, it's going to be 1 week before I'm going to receive them, since my lead time in this question is 1 week. Okay, so now let's move on to the projected on hand. So I had 35 units required, and I had 35 units as inventory. So I'm going to use up my beginning inventory to fulfill my demand in this particular case. Okay, so once I've fulfilled the demand, the inventory that I have on hand in week 2 is going to be 0 units, because I've used up all my beginning inventory, right? So my gross requirement is 30 units. My projected on hand is 0. So my net requirement is going to be whatever is the difference here, which is 30 units, right? So I will need to receive a certain amount of inventory. Now, since we're doing lot for lot, which means we're only going to be ordering that much inventory that is required for that one particular period, I will have to receive 30 units during week 2, which means I will need to place the order 1 week in advance, since lead time is 1 week. Okay, now I had a requirement of 30 units. I received 30 units, and I have no inventory that carries forward, so my projected on hand is going to be 0, right? Sorry, my projected inventory on hand is going to be 0 units. Similarly, I have a gross requirement of 40, which means my net requirement is also going to be 40, which means I need to receive 40 units, which means I need to place an order of 40 units 1 week in advance. All right, so I obviously have no inventory carrying forward because I used up everything. And my since the gross requirement is 0, my net requirement is also going to be 0. My planned receipts are actually going to be 0 as well, which means I don't need to place an order, right? Now in this case, I have nothing carrying forward. My net requirement is 10, because that's my gross requirement. I need to receive 10, which means I need to place an order of 10 units before. I can just go ahead and fill the rest of it out as such. All right, so once I've done this, now I need to figure out the holding cost. The holding cost in this particular case is going to be sum of the inventory that I've held, so which is this red area mark. Now I have not included week 1. Okay, the reason I have not included week 1 is because I did not have to hold any inventory on week 1 because I've used it up. If I whatever I had in the beginning of week 1 was consumed during week 1, I did not have to store it. Therefore, I'm not going to include this as my holding cost, but anything else here is going to be accounted for in my holding cost. So since I have not been holding any inventory because I've been using lot for lot, my holding cost in this question is going to be 0. The next part is my ordering cost. Now in this question, I've placed my order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, right? So my ordering cost is going to be 7 times the $100 of my setup cost per order, right? That's my ordering cost. It will give me 700. So the total cost of using lot for lot actually is 0 of my holding cost. 700 is my setup cost, which is a total of $700. All right. Now the next method is the economic order quantity method. Now, when I'm using the economic order quantity method, I have the exact same thing here. So the net requirement here is 0, right? So no receipts, and I don't need to place an order. So next month I have 0 on hand, which means I have a net requirement of 30 units. Now, whenever I'm placing the order, I'm now going to place an order that is equal to the economic order quantity derived from the exact same formula as we've done before. All right. So we know the total demand for this 10-week period is 270 units. That's I've added 35 plus 30 plus 40 plus 10 plus 40 plus 30 plus 30 plus 55 will give me 270 units. Now, whenever I am calculating the economic order quantity, whatever period I'm using this demand for, this total demand for, needs to be the same for the holding cost as well. Now the holding cost for one period is $1. Now if I'm doing it for 10 periods, it's going to be 1 times 10, or $10 per unit is going to be my holding cost. The setup cost is 100, so the economic order quantity is simply going to be 2 times 270, my annual demand, my 10-week demand, times my setup cost divided by my 10-week holding cost, which comes out to roughly 73 units. Now what I'm going to do is whenever I'm placing an order, it's going to be equivalent to 73 orders, all right, 73 units. Now this is actually 72.9 or something like that, so I've actually rounded it up to the nearest decimal. You guys can do that as well. So in this case, the planned receipts is going to be 73 units, which means I need to place an order of 73 units 1 week in advance. So now that I have 73 units here, right, and I've only used 30, the remaining 43 units gets carried forward to the next period. Now I have 43 units on hand. I have a requirement of 40 units, which means I have a net requirement of 0 because I have everything that is required. I don't need to place an order. I don't need to receive anything, right? Next thing is I have 3 units that's I had extra is going to carry forward to the next month. I have a net gross requirement of 0, so I have no net requirements or planned receipts. That 3 units is going to carry forward to the next month as well. But in this case, now I have a gross requirement of 10 units and a projected on hand of 3 units. Therefore, my net requirement is going to be the difference, which is 7 units, which means I need to receive another shipment equivalent to 73 units there, right? Which means I need to place the order 1 week in advance. Now, I had a net requirement of 7 units. I received 73, so the remaining 66 units is going to get carried forward to the next month, right? And then my gross requirement is 40, so the difference of so actually since I have more than enough inventory to meet my gross requirement, my net requirement is 0, so I don't need to place an order. The remaining 26 units, which is the difference here, is going to get carried forward to the next month. I have 26 on hand, but my requirement is 30, so my net requirement is 4 units, which I apologize for the background sound, is going to be so I need to receive, since I have a net requirement of 4 units, I need to actually receive another shipment of 73 units right there. So I need to place the order 1 week in advance, right? And once I have that finalized, right, the next step for me is to carry forward a certain amount of inventory. I had a net requirement of 4 units. I had 73 units as my next shipment, so the remaining 69 units is going to get carried forward to the 8th week, right? I have a net gross requirement of 0, so there is no net requirement or planned receipts that particular week. So the entire 69 units gets carried forward to the next period, and eventually the net requirement and the planned receipts are going to be 0 because my gross requirement is only 30 units and I have 69 units on hand. Okay, so for my final week, the remaining inventory that I did not use, which is 39 units, is going to get carried forward as my projected on hand for week 10. All right, so now that I have 39 units, left in week 10 in this case, right, the remaining the requirement here becomes my net requirement, which is 55 minus 39, or 16 units, as will be my net requirement. Now since my net requirement is not 0, I need to place another order of 73 units out here. So once I've placed the order of 73 units, I need to place that 1 week in advance. All right, now the issue here is that the difference here, since I only required 16 units and I ordered 73, the remaining 59 units is what I need to store on week 10 so that it can be used in week 11, right? So that is going to be included in my holding cost. So this total figure here, the sum of all of this is going to be the number of units that I'm holding. So since my holding cost is actually just $1, so it's going to be $375 times 1 is $375 is going to be my holding cost. As for my setup cost, I've placed my order 1, 2, 3, 4 times throughout the entire period, and that is going to be my ordering cost. It's 4 times $100 per order is equal to $400. So in this case, the total cost is going to be my holding cost of $375 plus my ordering cost of $400, which gives me $775 as my total cost of using the EOQ method. Now remember, when we were doing the lot for lot method, our total cost came out to 700. Now we have a slightly higher cost. So obviously the lot for lot was better than this one in this particular case. Now let's look at the final method, which is the part period balancing. In the part period balancing, what we're trying to do now is we're trying to figure out the optimum quantities of our optimum number of lots where we want to combine into one order. Okay, so we have this exact same question. So the net requirement is going to be 0, which means I don't need to receive anything in this case, and I have no inventory going forward to the next month or the next period. So in this particular case, the net requirement here, I have 30 units. So whenever I'm placing the next order, I need to calculate how many periods worth of order should I place in one bulk or in one lot. All right, so to do that, we first calculate something known as the economic part period, which is the ratio of the setup cost by the holding cost. So in this case, we know the setup cost is $100 per order and the holding cost is $1 per unit on a weekly basis, right? Which we get an economic part period ratio of 100. So once we figure out the EPP or the economic part period, we then figure out the holding part period, which is the HPP in this case, right? So to do that, we're just going to create a table with 3 columns. We have the period, number of periods that we're trying to order for, the net requirement for those periods, and the holding part period, right? So basically the holding part period is how many units are you holding equivalent with the time as well. So if you're holding 1 unit for 1 period, that's 1 holding part period. If you're holding 1 unit for 2 periods, that's 2 holding part period. If you're holding 2 units for 2 periods, that's 4 holding part periods. All right, so that's similar to labor hours or that concept. So in this case, the holding part period, now in this case we have a net requirement of 30 units in week 2. So if we just order enough for week 2, all right, then our net requirement is going to be just 30 units, right? It's just 30 units, and our holding part period in this case, because we don't have to hold any inventory in this case, is going to be 0. If we order for periods 2 and 3, right, if we order for periods 2 and 3 here, then we need to basically have 30 plus 40, or we need to order 70 units, and we need to actually store 40 units for 1 period, which means our holding part period is going to be 40 times 1, or 40, right, itself. If we order for, let's say, 2, 3, and 4, right? So if we order for 2, 3, and 4, the net requirement is also going to be 70, because 30 plus 40 plus 0 is also 70, and we only need to store 40 units for 1 period, and we get 40 as well. If we order for 2, 3, 4, and 5, in this case, 2, 3, 4 is 70, 3, 4 is 0, and 5 is 10, so we get a total net requirement of 80 units, right? And our holding part period in this case is going to be, we need to store 40 units for 1 period, and the remaining 10 we need to store for 1, 2, 3 periods. So it's going to be 40 for 1 period and 10 units for 3 periods, which means a total HPP of 70 in this case. Now if we store for if we order for 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right, then it's 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 80, plus 40 is 120 units, which means our holding part period is going to be 40 for 1 period, 10 for 1, 2, 3 periods, and 40 for 1, 2, 3, 4 periods, which means our holding part period is going to be 40 times 1 plus 10 times 3 plus 40 times 4, which is 230 units, and this is a pretty big number. Now what we want to do is we want to pick that let's say order that has a holding part period that is closest to our economic part period. In this case, our economic part period was 100, right? So the number here that is closest to 100 is, in this case, 70. So that would be my order quantity, not 70, but this corresponding net requirement here would be my order quantity of 80 units. So I would be placing an order of 80 units. I'll be receiving 80 units on week 2, which means I'll be placing that 1 week in advance. So I have 50 units that's carried forward to the next month, right? The net requirement in this case is going to be 0, because I basically have a gross requirement that is less than what I have on hand. The remaining 10 units gets carried forward to the next month. Since I have no gross requirement, I'm not going to be receiving anything or not requiring anything. And the final 10 units is going to get carried forward to the next month. And since the gross requirement and the projected on hand is equal, I have no net requirements and no planned receipts that month. Now I have no inventory left on hand, and I have a net requirement of 40 units. So I'm going to repeat the exact same process all over again. All right. So now I need for period 6. All right. So in this case, if I just order enough for period 6, right, that's 40 units. So I have a net requirement of 40 units, and I don't need to store anything, right? If I order for period 6 and 7, I need to order 40 plus 30, which is 70 units, right? And I'll have to store 30 units for one period, which means that that's going to be my holding part period. If I order for 6, 7, 8, right? 8 has 0 as my gross requirement, so my net requirement is only going to be 70 as well, and my holding part period is not going to change. If I order for 6, 7, 8, and 9, right? In that case, my net requirement is going to be 40 plus 30 is 70, plus 30 is 100, right? And my holding part period is going to be 30 units for one period, and the remaining 30 units for 1, 2, 3 periods, right? So in this case, it's going to be 30 times 1 plus 30 times 3, which is 120. Now, we know that this number has already exceeded 100. So obviously, if I did 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, that number would be more than 120, and that's obviously we're going further and further away from 100. So the closest number to 100 amongst this is 120, right? So in this case, that would be my corresponding order quantity here of 100 units. Now, if you get a number where they're equidistant from the economic part period, whichever one you pick is going to give you the same answer. So in this case, we placed an order of 100 units, 1 week in advance, right? So if I placed our order of 100 and my net requirement is 60, the remaining it's 40, the remaining 60 units gets carried forward to the next month, and I have a gross requirement of 30 units, so I have no net requirements or receipts. The remaining 30 as my inventory gets shifted to, let's say, gets carried forward to the next month or next period. And since I have a gross requirement of 0, I don't need to receive anything. The remaining 30 units gets carried forward to the next month, and then I have, since my gross requirement is equal to what I have on hand, I don't need to receive anything or plan or order anything. Then finally, I have 0 units on hand on week 10, which means I have a net requirement of 55, and since I do not know the information of week 11 and beyond, I'm just going to place an order of 55 units at the moment, 1 week in advance. All right, so in this case, the holding cost, right, is the sum of all of this, which turns out to be 190, right? And the ordering cost, since I have to place the order 3 times, in this case, right, the ordering cost is going to be 3 times 100, which is $300. So the total cost is going to be 190 plus 300, which is a total of 490, which is significantly cheaper than, in this case, lot for lot, as well as the EOQ method. So this gives you an idea of how to plan your orders, or how to bulk your lots to minimize your inventory costs.